I grew up on a farm in northeast Alberta, and that's a place where farms are miles and miles apart from one another. It's also the center of where it's called the largest block settlement of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine. There's a long history about that, but I grew up on the farms and part of a really large farming family, a part of a family that was church-going family. So that's Ukrainian Catholic. That's a Byzantine rite. A very, very devout parents, and also my father's parents were immigrants, and he had older brothers and sisters who came to Canada. He was born in Canada, but to say this is a pioneer family, and it was my grandmother on my mom's side who came, but just to say they're rather recent immigrants. So speaking Ukrainian in our home was an important piece of being Ukrainian in a community that was very strong, had a very, very strong Ukrainian presence. We also were involved in Ukrainian cultural activities, so beyond the church, although churches were centers of activities in any case. So we were a dancing family, all of us. So I have older brothers and sisters, and then there's a younger sister and me. And so that's kind of the one activity we did after school. In the local school, there was a Ukrainian dance activity. But anyway, I was doing this dancing stuff, and I would eventually do it at a professional level. And then, I could have these singing lessons, and in high school, I think it was in grade 11, I participated in a Kiwanis festival. Do you have those in the United States? Yeah. So, I sang a piece from Les Mis, and the adjudicator happened to be, I found out, was a university prof, and his name was Harold Weens. Was so impressed with my singing. He said, "You've got to audition for my my studio." And I was like, "Okay." Okay. It's kind of embarrassing that when I auditioned, I sang that same Les Mis piece, and I didn't know that that's not an aria because I didn't grow up with opera. So anyway, I auditioned and I was accepted, though I did not grow up, taking piano lessons or participating in choirs. That there weren't opportunities for that the same way, because of where I was, but also financially. Excuse me. A family of 6 kids, right? So, and in university, then in a Bachelor of Music program, everyone else had been doing that, and everyone spoke about music theory in ways. Everything was pretty much new to me, and I had done band in high school, but it's not really intensive music lessons, right? But I really felt it. This is not my world. It's not my language. Anyway, in university, I had the extraordinary fortune, of being at the university where Dr. Regula Qureshi was. There was one undergrad course in ethnomusicology at that time. And then there was some graduate courses that Regula was running, right? And it so happened that, by the time I learned about this thing called ethnomusicology and that I might want to study it, well, lo and behold, it was going to be that the grad course in ethnomusicology came in the schedule before the undergrad course. So I had to go, ask Regula permission if I could come to this class first, if I promised to take that other one, She was very encouraging. She really didn't hardly know me at that point. I hadn't taken a course with her as an undergraduate student. So I'm not quite sure how much she would have heard of me. It's not a very big music department, but it would have been around in my 3rd and 4th year performance recitals as an undergrad vocalist. I did sing Ukrainian materials, but she let me take that course, and it was a way of studying musics other than, the German and English and French and Italian masters, and asking new kinds of questions. So, I mean, this is how I came to it. It also allowed me to think about questions that I, engaging with the knowledge that I lived growing up, with respect to being a dancer, singing in church, singing in Ukrainian, right? Entirely different sounds. And as well as, I remember as a kid saying to my mom, I can hear the train whistle blowing and I know where it's going. Like the tune, right? I knew how it was going to cadence in the whistle. I knew it was the things about harmony, right? So these are sounds in our world that were also a really important part of me being in the world and living with others, human and other than human, right? So those were my experiences. I think it was a year after I graduated, maybe. No, it would have been my last year of undergrad. Regula Qureshi invited Beverly Diamonds to come for a 2-week residency. They hosted Beverly at the University of Alberta. And so she had these 2 weeks of public talks and lectures that we could join, right? And Regula set up a meeting with Beverly for me because I had expressed interest in maybe doing ethnomusicology. Well, I think more maybe, for sure, probably pretty clearly. And so York University was this other big school in Canada where they, ethnomusicology, that was, I think, the first grad program, maybe not the first grad program, but certainly one of the big ones. So I had a conversation with Beverly and just talked about interests and about my interests. And so she said, I look forward to seeing an application from you. I do think the care with which Beverly and Regula, certainly they showed me, right? That's my experience. I know, and many other people. I think that certainly shaped me. I have the expectation that we care for one another. Like that's how I grew up, in a family and in a community, right? But it's also been affirmed, right? That my own mentorship experiences in undergrad. But then there was kind of like this handoff, right? Like Regula arranging that meeting. I had that meeting with Bev. They were already working together very closely as colleagues. They had a relationship. And I went from one school to the other. And at York University too, it was a very caring environment. In particular, Rob Bowman, who teaches popular music studies there still, and David Lidov, who's retired musicologist, and Bob Whitmer, ethnomusicology, those 4 people, like with Beverly. And there were others, wonderful colleagues that they had too. But it was a very caring environment in a lot of ways. And we would, we really, I think those of us who grew up in that program as academics, it became clear to me how special that was when I would go to other conferences in Europe and in the United States. But this kind of mutual support and care is maybe not so common, we learned, right? I don't know what it is now, but at the time in other graduate programs, we didn't hear about that kind of experience. It was a lot more competitive, it seemed. Now I went on a bunch of postdocs after. I was a single mom through graduate school and largely till now. My son's 25 now and he's in grad school himself, but and I have bonus kids, but all through those years in grad school and developing a career, I was mostly a single mom. And so I took like 1-year contracts for teaching after I, used all the funding, like daycare costs $800 a month alone, right? So, so I took 1-year contracts while I was finishing my PhD, and then I did a bunch of postdocs, and then I took a museum job before I was hired into a tenure track position as a Canada Research Chair. And so that's a long, long ramp. I mean, it's always a long ramp for academics, but this one was kind of, that was my path. And always mindful, I've been really mindful of the fact, that there are other people now on that path. So I'm thinking about how can I help other ways that are going to lead to, faculty positions or the kinds of positions they want. So it's, in terms of shaping my career, I'd say that supporting care, mutual supporting care has been from the beginning with Regula and Beverly. All of the work I do always has been very, very closely engaged with community members. My perspective maybe is different in this from many people in the field, in that, like I told you about growing up in the Ukrainian community, right? Well, that Ukrainian communities was in the western part of Canada was a focus of a lot of folklore research. Mm-hmm. So, I lived in these communities that were written about, and it's a peculiar feeling being under the microscope, right? At the same time as it's something wonderful, because these communities that I'm a part of matter in a different way then, but also we are also the studied then, the researched, and it's kind of I remember in that graduate class that I took with Regula, we were talking about gender that week or something, right? And she was talking about whatever this study was somewhere somewhere else around the world. We're reading about scholarship, and she's like, right, Marcia, this is the way it is in and agricultural communities. The women, like, everyone does everything to support the men who are working on the field, and I'm just like, and she asked me to describe the situation, and I realized, so at that moment, first of all, I think that's the first time I was invited to speak in that class, because I was just an undergrad, and I it was, that was over. I worked so hard that semester, and I learned so much. But anyway, it was kind of funny. It's like, yeah, well, and I'm the studied too, right? So it was, I would say I've always been aware of that I am the researcher and the researched at once. And so sensitive that way, and there have been conferences where, the excursion at the conference is literally something, 2 miles down the road from the farm that I grew up on, So I have that sense of being the research at the same time. And also, I take very much to heart the idea that, as researchers, we are the learners, and the experts are the people, with whom we spend time in their communities. It's their music, it's their lives, it's their histories. And so, why shouldn't they have a say in what gets said about who they are? I mean, these are issues of representation, right? When I was starting grad school in the late 90s, we were talking a lot about reciprocity and giving back. And that was a big new thing at that time. But I think that it's just always been part of the work I do, is that it's with the people who are being researched, or we're all in this together, and making sure that people are comfortable with what's said about them. well, as a Canada Research Chair, I was also awarded funding to build a research center, and that's the Center for Sound Communities. And it was established as a center that would support community engaged research or community led research, really. The idea, like, I understand myself to be a public servant, and the role of service in my work is really important. I mean, I think in the early 2000s, I did a talk at Duke on an ethnomusicology of service. And I think at that time, like the people were talking a lot about like service learning, I think, right? That was kind of on the trajectory of where we are now. Yep. But you know, in Canada, this is all public funds. Like I am a public servant, actually. My salary comes from people's tax money. All the grant funds I get, almost all, are public funds, one way or another. So you know, I think that now I think there's lots of different ways to be an academic, and that's good. There needs to be lots of different ways, right? And we all work together in the end in this grand project at a university or more broadly. But you know, it's important to me that these monies are of service to broader communities. Like, it's not, for me, it's not okay to just publish something that very few academics will read, for example, right? It's too much money. It's too much time of other people. It's just, and it's about them. So how can I be of service to communities is a question it's a kind of like a basic question. Mm-hmm. And the research center was set up with that in mind. So there are, I guess, 3 big projects going on right now for teams I'm involved in. One is kind of an ongoing process of research creation for reconciliation. So research creation is, I guess, a Canadian term for critical creative research or artistic research. That's the European term, right? So we are engaging in different smaller projects or smaller tasks at different times with a broader goal of building and nurturing relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in local communities. So, and addressing, you know, long histories of racism and just systemic inequities, working a lot with youth and elders particularly. So these are usually intergenerational projects as well as intercultural projects. And another one is research with, excuse me, with people of African ancestry. And I'll say it that broadly because we're talking about projects that involve, you know, excuse me, an award-winning Malian composer and traditional musician, Lassana Diabate. And we've recorded an album with him. That was one of his requests when he came here originally to create a film, a documentary film that arose from a new production of the Sunjata story. And that film and that work has been picked up multiple times. Like, we launched that film in 2015 at the British Library. They took an excerpt of it and included it in their exhibit at the time, a West African exhibit. The Chicago Public School System has now picked it up to be part of their equity initiatives. And there's a new Museum of the African Diaspora in South Carolina that has just licensed a piece of it. And there's another education, excuse me, that wants to use it. So this is having, it's great that it's so useful for much wider publics as well. This then brings funds directly to the musicians. It also helps them gain a greater profile. Yeah. And then I'm still working very closely with Ukrainian communities. And at this time, you know, in the face of the war, Russia's war on Ukraine, this work is coming to the fore again. During COVID, I was working on a book on Ukrainian liturgical music. I'm coming back to that after some years. And it was kind of paused during COVID because there's not so much singing that was happening for a while, right? But more recently, the war, and there's an anniversary in the Ukrainian parish here in Sydney. So we're using this anniversary as an occasion, to engage in reconciliation with local Indigenous communities, to celebrate, to celebrate local histories and Ukrainian expressive practices, as well as to raise awareness for and nurture relationships with Ukrainian diaspora and homeland communities, right, in different parts of the world. So I think that right now, people everywhere are looking to learn about Ukrainians and things Ukrainian. So it's an opportunity to share that as well. I've told you about my own experiences, right? And how it's been a part of helping me to make sense of the world. More importantly, the answer to that question has been reflected back to me multiple times by people with whom I work in community, so that my teachers. For example, I was a postdoc at one university, and there was a gathering of elders, Indigenous elders, local Indigenous elders. And the idea was that there would be consultation regarding it was the anthropology program's development. And they had asked elders to come in to listen to the elders. I was just an adjunct faculty member, like part-time, because I was doing my postdoc, right? But there was some time beforehand to meet elders and mingle, and then we all sat down and they asked that question. And it was a very powerful thing. The elder who first spoke pretty quickly into his statement gestured to me and said, like our friend here who does ethnomusicology, music is a part of our lives, every aspect of our lives. It's a part of ceremony. It's a part of every part of our, a different stage in our life. It's a part of, singing to our children. It's a part of celebrations. And this elder spoke more eloquently than I. It was the elder who said, we need ways of acknowledging, different kinds of knowledges, different ways of being than maybe people in the university are used to looking for, right? Or are used to valuing. Just to say, it's the people in community with whom we work who are telling us this is important. In the communities where we work, the non-Indigenous communities, for instance, right? We have celebrations or occasions or like liturgy. Music is a part of this. It qualitatively changes the experience. I think too, there's a nice moment. I remember when we first hosted Lasana Diabate and Hawa Diabate and Sharif Keita. In 2014, when we were creating the Sunjata story production and film, we worked with a local Black community in a little city called Glace Bay here on Unama'ki, Cape Breton, and there is a UNIA, and it's a center for Black culture and community gatherings, and they hosted a chicken dinner. And there's a choir from a local African Orthodox church. There was a community leader from Halifax came down with his son, and they were doing drumming, African drumming, and there was music making of the musicians who had come from Mali, and they were all sharing their music. They were sharing their stories as well. Like it was a space that inspired that sharing, and it's music that was doing that in a lot of ways. And the languages spoken were different. Malians are French speaking, and not too many French speakers in Glace Bay. But certainly we all know, ethnomusicologists, we all know how compelling sharing music can be, but that it is a different way of relating. And then that kind of goes back to the Indigenous elder, right? That it's a different way of being in this world. And when we are trying to understand this, our world, and we're all doing that as ethnomusicologists, right? That's why we're studying what each different case that we're studying. If we don't think deeply, if we don't engage deeply with sound and music and movement, we are missing a huge part of human experience. But not just because I say so, right? It's the people with whom I work are saying so, and that's why I continue to do the work that I do.